This is Podcast or Perish, a podcast about academic research and why it matters. My name is Cameron Graham, Professor of Accounting at the Schulich School of Business in Toronto. Ela, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
You are my first return guest on Podcast or Perish. I should remember the name of my own podcast, Podcast or Perish.
We can start again if you like.
That's okay. It's good for my humility to keep stuff like that in.
I'm so excited to be one of your first, if not the first, returning guests on your podcast. My name is Ela Veresiu, and I am now an associate professor of marketing, the current marketing area coordinator, and the marketing PhD program representative at the Schulich School of Business. I specialize in branding and consumer behavior.
I have deep sympathy for you as you list off all your administrative duties. We've all had a chance to do those, and they can be very time-consuming. So I'm impressed that you have so much time for research. Tell me about your research, your general approach. I know you've had quite a trajectory of research topics. How would you describe your current interests?
I think the common thread would be that I study branding and consumer behavior from a sociological perspective using qualitative methods. My research overall focuses on consumer diversity, well-being, and market inclusion at really the interplay of institutions, technology, branding, and identity. I think that would wrap it up in a nutshell.
Yeah, that is a big nutshell. You've got a lot of things, and a lot of them are picked up in your most recent publication, which is on the morality of consumption. Can you tell me about this paper?
Today, I'm here to talk about a new co-authored paper called Moralizing Everyday Consumption, the Case of Self-Care, that was very recently published in the Journal of Consumer Research. It's how consumers moralize their everyday consumption practices, especially when engaging in self-care. I'll reveal our findings right away, and then I'll dive deeper into them.
Sure.
We find that moral considerations, a person's appraisals of right and wrong, tend to significantly shape consumer behavior and decision-making. Probably the most interesting thing from this study is that moral considerations not only affect traditionally polarizing consumption choices, such as recreational drug use, but even routine, basic, everyday purchases can be influenced by moral judgments and often require justification to the self, the person that's engaging in these purchases, as well as to others. We set out to better understand, and these are the two research questions that guide this particular paper, when and how consumers moralize everyday consumption practices. And we examine these questions in the context of the booming self-care market, which is a broad category that includes all types of products, services, and resources that are meant to support self-care.
Now, why is self-care something that is particularly connected to questions of morality?
So that's an interesting question. Everyday consumption is likely to be moralized when there are culturally contested meanings of consumer trends, which leads cultural authorities, influencers, brand managers, medical professionals, journalists to prescribe very different ways to pursue the same consumption goal. So, for example, we find that the quote unquote cultural script of self-care perpetuated by marketers and influencers includes much more bubble baths, wine, and this shopping spree idea that anything goes as long as it makes you happy in the moment. The cultural script of self-care that's perpetuated by healthcare practitioners encompasses exercise, a balanced diet, and regular doctor's appointments. We find that exposure to cultural scripts that clash, these clashes trigger consumer moral introspection. What's the right practice? What types of products and services should I buy? Which cultural authorities should I listen to? And what's the wrong way of engaging in self-care? And We were surprised that the consumers we interviewed in this project had very different views on what self-care meant to them and were policing others in their real life, in their own circles, as well as online about the right and wrong ways of engaging in self-care consumption. So we didn't go into this project thinking it was going to be such a contentious topic and industry.
No, I can imagine. But on the other hand, we know that people not only have conflicting ideas on particular practices, for example, whether drinking alcohol is right or wrong. You know, there are some people who think that that's just wrong. It's sinful. Other people think it's just an enjoyable thing to do. But there's also conflict about who gets to enjoy that form of self-care, right? We've got a great colleague at York University by the name of Steve Gates. He's an eminent researcher in the field of homelessness.
Mhm.
And he talks about how, when people put money in the cup of someone who is homeless, people will say, well, why are you giving that money to that person? They're just going to spend it on alcohol. And Steve says, like, we go home at the end of a stressful day and we open a bottle of wine, pour ourselves a glass of wine. How come we're the only ones who get to self-medicate, right? So there's this conflict, not just between two opposing views, but also about who those views should be applied to, right? And I think that maybe that has to do with this definition of self. Who is a self?
Oh, absolutely. Interestingly enough, through our media as well as market level data, we found four what we refer to as market mediated scripts for self-care for very different ones.
Could
Uh,
just take a side detour and explain to me how you went about doing the research. Like, what did you actually go and get for data?
I'm very excited that I worked with a doctoral student on this particular project. So this is based on her dissertation work. So she collected all of the data.
Is this Rachel or Colleen?
That's Rachel.
Rachel. So this
Yeah,
is Rachel
the
Hochstein.
author of this project, and I'm very, very proud of her. She's a wonderful scholar and colleague.
For the record, your third co-author, Colleen?
Colleen was Rachel's official supervisor at Florida State University.
Colleen Harmeling.
That's correct. So Rachel collected news coverage with articles featuring self-care in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and USA Today from January 2015 to February 2021. 762 articles, which was quite impressive. Then she also collected TikTok videos. So they were self-care related TikTok videos from 65 brands. She also collected consumer-generated TikTok videos and comments. These were just regular TikTok users that mentioned self-care.
These are the brand influencers you're talking about?
No, just regular consumers.
Okay.
And finally, she collected consumer interviews and diaries. So these were 26 in total, semi-structured consumer interviews. The interviewees had an option to participate in writing diary entries for about a month on their self-care routines. So all of this together comprised our very extensive data set, and we found four different scripts perpetuated by these cultural authorities on how to engage in self-care consumption. We refer to them as the hygienic, improvement, holistic, and indulgent self-care scripts. But what is the most fascinating finding about them is that all of these scripts have a different definition and meaning that they promote about what the self means, as well as what care means. So we thought that was very interesting, and that ties back to your comments. So for example, in the hygienic self-care script, self is typically defined as the physical body, and care are any actions taken to maintain the body in its immediate environment. Whereas in what we refer to as the improvement self-care script, the self is a culturally ideal body, and care are actions taken to move the self towards a cultural ideal of productivity and success. And in the holistic script, the self is an integrated body, mind, and soul. And care are any actions that enhance the longevity of internal feelings of contentment. And finally, in the indulgent self care script, the self is a pampered body entitled to immediate consumption and gratification. And so, care is any actions that are comforting in the moment. And interestingly enough, all of these different scripts had criticisms attached to them. So the hygienic self care script was criticized as not being self care because we should all be able to take basic care of our body. The indulgent self care script similarly was labeled as not self care at all, but rather being selfish and a therapy dupe and wasteful and causing people to ignore their personal problems and responsibilities. Whereas the improvement self-care script was mostly criticized for normalizing certain body types and body ideals.
So you've got three of those categories that are related to the self as a body, right?
Correct.
There's the hygienic one, which is basically looking after the body as we are.
Yeah.
There's the improvement one, which has
All of
this.
them are related to bodies. So
Okay.
the hygienic is just the physical body,
You said that the holistic one is a body mind kind of a composite.
mind and soul.
Right, right. So the hygienic and the improvement and the indulgent ones are quite focused on the body, the physical body. And the improvement one has got this goal in mind, whereas the
Yes.
others are more about how you are now. Is that a fair categorization?
That is 100% correct.
So
Yes.
that improvement one I find quite interesting because you've got this really lovely long word. I love long words in academic articles. Teleoaffectivity. Can you define
Yeah.
that? Because that's got that idea of a goal in mind.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, teleoffectivity is a consumption goal.
So this is the reason why you are doing the consumption, like this end state that you have in mind?
Correct. It comes from a practice theoretician, if we want to get into
Oh, I do.
more details, by the name of Shatsky, who defined teleoactivity as a set of ends that participants should or may pursue that are allied with normative emotions and even moods. Teleoaffectivity guides the external and internal states of being that consumers desire to
So
achieve.
this is about desire, right?
Correct.
Now,
Yeah.
these different ways of, you're calling them cultural scripts. So I want you to
Correct.
define that notion of cultural script for me, and then I want you to tell me what market mediated means. So first of all, what's a cultural script?
A cultural script is something that prescribes doings and meanings and objects that everybody agrees form a certain practice, if you will.
Can you give me an
So
example?
engaging in hygienic self-care includes certain objects that brands would like you to use, like Dove body wash. It includes taking showers, taking your vitamins, going to the doctor if you fall ill.
Take a
And
bubble bath.
that would not be hygienic. That would be more indulgent.
And so
Yeah.
what does market mediated mean?
So market mediated means that brands come in to try to sell consumers on the different objects that they should be using, which tend to be very branded products and services in order to achieve self-care. What we also found through our consumer interviews and diaries is that consumers often set moral boundaries of acceptable self-care consumption when they have cultural scripts that clash with one another, as well as clash with consumers' moral intuitions. So we find that they assume for various positions, some more combative than others. When they assume a moral righteous stance, they typically align themselves with the rules of one chosen script only out of the available set of cultural scripts. and they police themselves and others from deviating from this particular script. If they engage in a more moral inclusivity, they tend to align themselves more with the desired end goal of self-care. So they may choose one particular cultural script that they like more than others, but there's more of a kumbaya where whatever an individual finds as the most effective for him and herself, that's great for them. So live and let live, in other words. Then the third type, which we refer to as moral licensing, they try to engage with different moral scripts, but in particular orders in order to assuage the negative associations of each script. The most perfect example we have for this is a phenomenon on TikTok called Self-Care Sunday, where they would post a Self-Care Sunday routine. So they would start off with gym and groceries, then they would clean their house and their car, then they would shower, then they would spend time in nature, then perhaps they would engage in yoga before bed, and then finally something more indulgent like YouTube and face masks. So they would go from things that were morally the most acceptable, like grocery shopping and cleaning your house, to things that were the most self-indulgent. So they would justify the criticisms of one of the cultural scripts by saying, but we also engage in the more positive or socially accepted cultural scripts.
So there's a diversity in how people approach this.
Absolutely.
And that's going to be perceived with different value judgments depending on which perspective people are coming from.
Absolutely. Absolutely, which is so interesting. Ultimately, this consumer moralization process has implications for a variety of consumption practices as well as public policy makers.
So the role of policymakers here, is it directed towards the marketers or towards the consumers?
The reality is that policymakers also need to engage in marketing actions, if you will, in order to change public perceptions. So, for example, underlying sustainability, inclusion, and public health initiatives are widely varying moral intuitions related to the most appropriate way to achieve a desired public goal. Consumers need to recalibrate their moral intuitions through moral introspection. And if they don't reconfigure their moral intuitions, they're likely to balk at mandates such as the introduction of paper bags and reusable bags. So we think that understanding the full moralization process from how people acquire cultural scripts to how they apply and defend them is essential in changing consumption behaviors in these public initiatives, if you will.
My mind is going in a different direction here, and I'm thinking of the articles I've read recently about bike lanes in Toronto and the contentious alternative ways of regulating this public space. I wonder what policymakers would want to take into account. If I follow your logic, you're trying to get them to see that triggering these moments of introspection about the moral value of consumption choices, choosing to drive a car, choosing to ride a bike, choosing to take transit, is a
Yeah,
key towards successful public policy. Is that the direction you're going?
exactly. First of all, policymakers need to understand that there are competing cultural scripts that are often market mediated, guiding, let's say, transportation in this particular case, where they're going to compete for consumers' attention, if you will. And so ideally, you want to ensure that the cultural script that is less damaging to the environment gets the most moral buy-in from everyday consumers.
What are the consequences for corporations and brand managers if they don't understand this stuff properly?
They may have a harder time with their marketing and branding strategies, especially for entrepreneurs or companies that are trying to bring a new product, service, experience to the market. For example, our research suggests that early adopters will likely face greater moral judgment from others for their consumption choices. Brand managers should align themselves with the desired end goal and be morally inclusive.
Well, it's a fascinating study, and it seems to go after just about every aspect of modern life if you want to push it
It
in
is,
those directions.
yeah, yeah. It is at the core, it's about how consumers and other actors moralize everyday consumption practices.
Well, these ideas of cultural scripts, if you just take away the self care part of it for a second, set that aside, this idea of how people make choices using cultural scripts would have implications for voting, for
Yes. I did not want to get into
no, no. I will just, flag that for those who want to think about
Yes.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It probably has implications for even more important decisions, such as whether you support the Leafs or the Canadians.
That's very true. Cultural scripts are a way to understand that our our actions are guided by others. Our actions, thoughts, behaviors, not just as consumers, but as people in
Hmm.
general, don't just occur in a vacuum,
Hmm.
but are rather guided by others. And that being said, we still have an opportunity to shape them ourselves. So consumers can also shape market-mediated cultural scripts or cultural scripts in general. That's the beauty of this construct,
Hmm.
that yes, it guides our individual thoughts, behaviors, actions, but we also have an opportunity to shape future cultural scripts. So they're not written in stone. It takes a while to change them because they occur at the aggregate level, but it's not impossible
Hmm.
for these scripts to change. And in fact, historically, they have, for better or worse.
Andrew.
I know you identify selfishness as like something that's tied more to the indulgent side of the script, but do you see other forms of those scripts leading to selfish behavior?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Perhaps the improvement self-care script could also be considered selfish because you're always trying to improve yourself to some kind of cultural ideal of productivity and success, but not really the holistic nor the hygienic. Would they be considered selfish?
I sort of get the implication that a lot of these self-care things that people do, there's a spontaneity to them.
We didn't find that there was really spontaneity. They've now become ritualized. Perhaps they started out more spontaneous, but now brands and influencers are really pushing for their routinization and ritualization, of course, to get more sales and ensure that they have a loyal customer base that's going to keep coming back.
Right. What's your definition of self-care in like very sort of plain layman's terms?
It's consumer actions directed towards the goal of sustaining one's life, health, and well-being.
Tell me about your new papers that you're working on.
So currently, I'm working on a paper that looks at stigma in the marketplace, ethnic stigma or immigrant stigma, and how it is more nuanced, how it is created, and how it is
Yeah,
managed.
you've been working on
Um,
that notion of stigma for a long time. That goes right back
yes.
to your doctoral research, doesn't it?
That's right. So I'm continuing the thread with that work, trying to expand its definition and also expand its public policy implications and managing strategies
Mm.
of how to mitigate it or minimize it.
Well, sadly, the stigmatization of immigrants is what we might call an evergreen research topic. It will always be there to study. I hope that
Yeah.
you can make some good, penetrating insights around that for us. Where can people find you, Ella?
I do have a website. So my own website is elaveresiu.com or on the Schulich website.
I'll provide links to those in the show notes. Thank you so much for talking with me, Ella. It's just lovely to
My absolute
nice to
pleasure.
have you on the program again.
Thank you very much for inviting me.